Whether you have a large space or a small space, container gardening can be extremely rewarding. And I tend to spend a lot of time with my containers in my yard because I do have a smaller space. But I have not yet talked about the wonderful world of terracotta pots and how gardening can be extremely rewarding when you add these beautiful containers into your space. So today I'm going to talk about why we would choose terracotta pots, what plants would really benefit from these gorgeous containers, and also how to care for these containers throughout the season. You're not going to want to miss any of this, so stick around and become a terracotta pro. So why are terracotta pots a favorite among many gardeners? Well, there are a couple very important reasons. And the first reason is the breathability. A lot of people don't realize how beneficial that is because the terracotta clay is rather porous, allowing moisture from the outside to permeate inside. It also allows the moisture inside to permeate outside, and also oxygen to reach the roots in a way that a lot of containers that are made of plastic or composite material does not allow. So that breathability is really the number one beneficial attribute to these gorgeous containers, and it really can benefit any plant that you plant in here. Now, the next key benefit to using these gorgeous containers is the temperature regulation. Here in Southern California, we're in zone 10A, and in the summer it can get relatively warm here. Even though we're closer to the beach, we do have warm days and a few humid days. And during that time, they really do insulate those roots, allowing the plants to stay happier and healthier longer. That's another one that people don't realize necessarily when they're planting these, that they do give that protection to the root system. And I think that's a key element that is super beneficial, and we don't necessarily think about the health of our roots in the plants. We're more concerned with how the plant looks up on top, if it's blooming, if it's staying green, but root health is extremely important. And if we can do our best to really give them protection and make sure that our root systems are nice and healthy, then the plant overall will benefit greatly. And these really can help with that immensely. All right, the next one is they have a really beautiful natural aesthetic to them. And so I feel like that's another reason why gardeners love these containers, because whether you have a more modern look to your garden or you have a more classic look, they really do look great in any of those situations. I've seen it before where you have those streamlined plants or cactus or even succulents in these containers, and they do extremely well because of course, breathability does help those kind of plants. But then I've also seen classic gardens, English gardens that have boxwoods and evergreens planted up in these containers, along with flower bulbs, tulips, and daffodils, and they look gorgeous as well in those more classic situations. And so I think by adding them into our garden today, which I've used terracotta so many times, it's been a while since I've added it, but when I do add these today, I think it's going to look great in what we already have here going on in our garden with our hanging baskets and our tiered containers that we've added recently. I think it's going to be a welcome addition into our space, and it might be also a great addition into your space as well. And finally, the last thing that I want to talk about is that moisture management, because sometimes when we're beginners, we don't necessarily get the watering regimen to all of our plants. And so if you are prone to overwater, these containers, because of their breathability, will allow that oxygen to come into the roots, and they do dry out quickly. So if you're somebody like me, when I first started, overwater because you think everything's thirsty all the time, it really will help with that until you kind of get your grounding and realize how much water these containers actually need. It will help with that for sure. So I would recommend these. Great if you're just starting out and you're tending to overwater. They will help you, and they will help balance that moisture control in a natural way. So pretty great, right? A lot of things to think about. And I feel like those main reasons are why they've been so popular all of these years and centuries. So there are a few plants that really will benefit from being planted in these terracotta containers. I mean, you could pretty much plant anything in these containers, but there are a couple that really do benefit in ways that other plants may not. And the first variety of plants would be obviously your cactus and your succulents, because those kind of plants do not like to stay waterlogged for any long period of time. And because of the breathability of these containers, they really do allow that excess moisture to exit the container through the reservoir. And I think a container like this one here, which is a little bit lower profile, would really greatly benefit those containers that have those succulents in there. You could put a couple of different varieties in here. You could also put like a string of pearls that would hang over the side. Something like this would be great on a tabletop. And you don't need necessarily a really deep reservoir like this one right here, because the root systems are not super extensive. I mean, they do have root systems, but they don't necessarily travel all the way to the base of the container. So something like this for a cactus or a succulent would be absolutely perfect. I've seen people use larger containers. Ones that are even lower profile than this would be fine as well. But you do want to make sure that if you plant up those cactus or succulents, you use the correct soil that will allow for that drainage, even though the reservoir will allow for that moisture to exit the container and let it dry out a little bit. You want to make sure that you use the correct soil before you plant anything like that up, so that you can be ensured to have the greatest success. So that would be a great idea too. And I love this container right here, this low profile Terra Cotta. I love how worn it is. It's a little bit dirty, and that natural charm really looks great in any space, like I said before. Now, the next kind of plant that would really benefit from these containers would be something like your herbs. Things like oregano or thyme or basil, those kind of things would really do well in these containers. And I think if you wanted to add like a little corner in your space that would have those edible herbs, I think it would really be charming, and it would look absolutely beautiful for sure. Again, that permeability of the container is so beneficial to those herbs, because they don't like to stay extremely wet over long periods of time. And it really is helpful to have those plants stay healthy, because when we're growing herbs, especially edible ones, we want them to be available to us throughout the season so we can use it in our cooking and other things like that. Now, those Mediterranean plants like lavender, I said oregano, even like olive topiaries, things like that we find normally in the Mediterranean do great in these situations, because things like lavender, I mean, every once in a while I have success by planting them in the ground, but ever so often that area where they're planted might retain a little bit too much moisture, or I might water it a little bit too much and they might get a little bit unhappy. And there's really no way to dry out the ground faster than it actually does naturally. But when you plant them in something like this, that permeability again helps the plant stay healthy and strong. And those Mediterranean plants do not like to be waterlogged for any prolonged period of time. I was just at a local nursery and I saw the really nice variety of a dwarf olive tree that's non-fruit bearing. It looks so amazing. I might have to steal that idea and add it to my spot, but I thought that is a perfect thing to add into your space. That really does add the charm, and it's the perfect container for that type of plant. And then things like houseplants. I've seen people use very small containers that they might have a snake plant or a spider plant. And again, those two houseplants don't like to be waterlogged either, and they could really create an attractive look into your space. Now, the last type of plant that I want to talk about is a flowering plant, and it's one that a lot of us think of as a very hardy plant that we just kind of set it and forget it, but they do require a little bit more attention than we initially think, because a geranium is beautiful for sure, but they don't like to be waterlogged for a long period of time. If you have an area in your yard where you've planted your geraniums, you know that if it stays wet and moist, some of those canes can rot over time. The plant can also drop its leaves, which is never a good thing. And so they do benefit from a little bit of a cleanup here and there, and they don't like to be wet for a long period of time. And that's why terracotta pots are perfect for our gorgeous geraniums. Now we're going to start planting these up, and there's a little bit of prep that has to go into that process first, but there are a couple things that I like to consider before we start. First of all, it starts way back from when we purchased these, and I like to always look first for pots that don't have any pre-existing cracks, ones that are a little bit thicker that I know are going to last a little bit longer in my space, because sometimes we can find reasonable terracotta, but it may be a little bit thin, and those thinner pots tend to break a lot easier. You know, once it gets cold or they've been moved a little bit, they are more prone to crack. And so if you want them to last a little bit longer, you want to kind of feel them, touch them, make sure they have some nice weight to them, and also make sure that they don't have any pre-existing cracks before you purchase them, because we don't want them to be destroyed even before we get them in our garden. So that's something to consider for sure. So now that we have our containers, we want to make sure that we prep them before we plant them, because it's really important, because they are porous, to take these containers and soak them in water for about an hour before we plant them up, because this way, when we put our soil in here and we water them up, the container itself won't immediately pull all the moisture out of the soil. So that's really important, and I think it's one that I tended to forget when I first started using terracotta, but it really is important. So I'm going to take this container right here that I purchased from Sam's Club of all places. I'm going to fill this up with water, and I'm going to set these 3 containers into the water and let it soak for about an hour. Then we're going to come back and we're going to get them all planted up, and I'm going to prepare the bottom of the pots first. So let's get them in the water and get them soaking. So while those soak, I need to talk about how to address the drainage in these containers. And if you notice here, that little hole on the bottom is somewhat large, and the larger your container, the larger the hole will probably be. So I can tell you right now that hole is much larger than my plastic containers that I've placed in my yard, and that's because the drill bit that I use is relatively small, which allows for the drainage, but I don't lose a lot of soil. But if we add soil to these containers without really putting something or some material in the bottom, we might lose a lot of that valuable soil. So I would highly recommend putting a little bit of gravel in the bottom. Today, I'm going to use some old terracotta containers that I've broken up, the ones that have been cracked or that I'm no longer using. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some of these pieces like this. You can tell that's arched right there, so that would be perfect right over that drainage hole in the center. And I don't need to add very many things in here. Perfect. And maybe another small one right there. And maybe one more on this side right here. Perfect. And I think that would be pretty much all I would need. And then when I put my soil in here, then it would be ready to go and it wouldn't leach out the bottom. So as for seasonal care, if you're in a place where you freeze or you have hard frost, you definitely want to protect them by bringing them indoors or placing them in your garage in those really harsh winter months, because they are prone to crack, and when they expand and contract, it's not really the best for these containers, so something to consider there. Here we don't necessarily have to worry about that too much, but over time, as you can tell, this one's pretty worn. I recently had some spring bulbs planted in this, and I get a little bit of those mineral deposits right there, and it gets a little bit green, especially if you have it in a shaded spot. I tend to really like the look of how they look a little bit weathered. I think it brings a certain kind of charm into the garden. But if that bothers you, you can take a little bit of vinegar and water and scrub them down, and that mineral deposit will come right off, and they'll be looking really nice in no time. So just a couple things to consider, and it really depends on your personal preference. Now let's talk about the plants that I'm going to pot up today, and I think you're going to really enjoy what I have planned. Let's go over here and check it out. So this area of my yard is my annuals and various plants that are awaiting their final project. And so I have a bunch of different things here, but the first thing that I'm going to pot up today is this really nice rosemary. It's an organic version, and I actually got this on clearance at Lowe's, which was really nice. I think it was like 90 cents or something. And so it smells amazing, and anytime I smell rosemary, I think of roast chicken of all things. So can't wait to use these in some of our recipes. So that's going to go in a container, probably the largest container. Next, I'm going to be planting this geranium. It's Beautiful. It's just a non-branded red variety, and I think this is going to probably be one of my favorite things that I plant today. I tend to really enjoy planting color in containers, and although I am going to be planting herbs, it's going to be great to get something that is going to bloom and look beautiful there. So can't wait to get this planted up. And then the last container that I'm going to pot up today will be with this really pretty, and again, I found this on clearance. This is French lavender. It's, you know, a little bit yellowed. It doesn't necessarily like it being in the small container, so I think it's really going to benefit when I plant it up in that terracotta, and will absolutely love the breathability of that container. And then lastly, I didn't show you this, I have another container that's a little bit longer, and I'm going to put a couple of really cool herbs in that container. The first one I'm going to plant is this really nice English thyme. Another one of those great roasting herbs that really do benefit our dishes in the fall and any time of the year. I always love adding some thyme to my containers, and I use this in a lot of various recipes, one of them being my pot roast. So fantastic to put a couple of sprigs of thyme on top as it bakes. Turns out magnificent, gives it a really nice depth of flavor. So English thyme is going in. And then lastly, some Italian oregano. This smells amazing, and we always use dried oregano on our pizzas and Italian dishes, and if I had fresh, that would be even better. Oregano, another great one to add. So I'm going to gather these up, do a little shopping from my plant section right here, and we're going to plant them up, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Let's go. So they're all planted up, and I think this is one of my favorite plantings I've ever done. I just love how they turned out. I love the rustic feel to it. But there's a couple questions that I want to address that a lot of people may have. First of all, how do these pots compare to plastic pots or composite pots in terms of cost and durability? Well, terracotta, obviously, it's a more traditional pot. It takes more material to put them together. It's not inexpensive material, so they are a little bit more costly than our plastic containers. containers, but in terms of durability, they will last a very long time with proper care. If you're in a place, like I said before, that freezes, then wintering them over in the garage or in the house is great. They can last for many, many years. There are a lot of people that are using pots from way back when, and they still stand today. So another question that frequently comes up is if you can paint these pots. And you know what? A lot of people do that. A lot of people will seal the pots with various sealers, and that's totally fine too, but that will change the breathability of the pot. So if you have a plant that doesn't like to lose a lot of moisture, then you may consider sealing them. But if you have plants like this, then I would just leave them just the way they are, because it does impede on their breathability. So I've painted pots before. This is an example of one that's a little bit older that I've used in my garden. I used a spray paint for this, and it looked great that first season, but it did change the breathability of the pot. But the plants that I had in here really did benefit from it being sealed just a little bit. But over time, it's chipping away, obviously. So I would say for me, moving forward, I probably wouldn't paint them, although there are a lot of great videos out there with people that decorate their pots and they look absolutely beautiful. They give them a whimsical look, and whatever suits your style, I say do that. But for me, I'm not going to paint these because, like I said before, these really can benefit from that breathability, and I don't want to lose that very important attribute of these containers. So that's our container planting in terracotta today. It's basically terracotta planting 101, but I hope you learned something today. And it was so much fun going through the process and also planting up some of my herbs in terracotta along with some beautiful flowers, and this gorgeous lavender was so much fun. I'm wondering why I didn't do it earlier. So anyways, thank you guys for coming today. We hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye.